try to be vegan in Scotland, for example, or like in Canada. Like, okay, let's remove like the modern food system and think about how that would work. Like, it just wouldn't. It's literally impossible. But if you're living on the equator, if you're living, it's going to be way, way easier because you've got access to plants all year round. So just understanding like your environment and how that obviously plays a role. Because at the end of the day, with our genetics, 30% is fixed-ish. And then 70%, the rest of it, is based on epigenetics. So genes switch on and off based on our environment.
Hello and welcome to Lewis and Kyle Show, an interview podcast where my friend Lewis and I interview entrepreneurs and investors in just about every category, from real estate to crypto to internet content creation. We've done it all, and we've done it from a little bit different of a twist because Lewis and I are not your classic 40, 35-year-old internet entrepreneur already. We are young. We're both in our early 20s, 21, 22, around that area. And we're asking questions from the perspective of that sort of person until we get different sorts of answers. Today, we have another great guest, one of probably 85 now, something like that. We've been going for quite a while at this, and you're going to really enjoy it. Lewis, who do we have today?
This episode is with Tom Merrick, otherwise known on the internet as the Bodyweight Warrior. Tom is a YouTuber and content creator in the bodyweight athletic training niche. So that's some gymnastics, that's some yoga, and then also just kind of applied flexibility for various sports. He also gets into the nutrition aspects, the sleep aspects, just everything to be a top performer, specifically in, the bodyweight components of athletics. He joins us in this conversation to just answer all of our dumb questions about bodyweight training, about how he's grown his channel to be so large, how he's grown his following, how he's making money, some of the other projects he's creating, and the things that Kyle and I are probably doing wrong in our health that we could quite easily correct if we just followed his advice. I think there's a lot of value for anyone interested in improving their health in this episode, and I'm excited for you to listen to it. So without further ado, I'm going to switch over to the episode with Tom right now. Tom, welcome to the Lewis and Kyle Show. I'm glad you're joining us today.
Cool. Thank you guys for having me.
Absolutely. Been watching your videos for a long time. I'm a big fan of calisthenics, bodyweight training, and just a lot of the other aspects of your channel because I know it's not just limited to that. So I'm excited for this conversation. Let's start out.
You train much calisthenics yourself?
I'd call myself a solid intermediate calisthenics athlete. So pretty advanced flexibility. So, full splits, full front splits, and then
have you?
Decent handstand work. And then, but I don't have can't do 25 pull-ups consecutive, but decent skill set, backflip.
Damn, man. Full splits is impressive. I would say that I want a live demonstration, but we'll let you off.
I'm on a standing desk. It might be difficult to get the angles right with everything. Middle splits, I still got, that gap's quite difficult to close, those final 2 to 3 inches. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's about where I am. But let's start with your story. Maybe around the time you're 18, how do you kind of progress into becoming a calisthenics YouTuber and entrepreneur? Start with 18 and kind of walk quickly to where you are now so we have some context.
Sure, I'll try and keep it brief because I feel like the backstory stuff isn't always the most exciting. Or certainly mine isn't particularly exciting. I started training because I got a bit chubby. Basically, wasn't a huge fan of how I was feeling and how I was looking. I feel like probably a situation that many people find themselves in around 18, 19, 20, even perhaps later on. So I originally got into training more out of aesthetic reasons. And did some bodybuilding, did some powerlifting, and then I actually I had mono, you guys call it mono, we call it glandular fever. So I got that when I was in university, college, and that kind of wiped me out. Basically, I think at that point I'd been training for 2 years, and I basically lost 2 years worth of gains in the space of 3 or 4 weeks because I was sort of just absolutely wrecked from that. And that was at the point at which I got into bodyweight training because the GP, the doctor, was like, you can't really go back into training. You've got to be careful because of fatigue and all these sort of things associated with mono. So I was like, bodyweight training will be easy. I'll do some bodyweight training. And how wrong I was that bodyweight training isn't, as I'm sure you mentioned, isn't particularly easy, certainly when you take it to more of the advanced movements. So really I kind of just got lost in that whole thing. When I was at college, there was the Great Britain sort of national gymnastics team were training at the university I was at. So, I started getting into bodyweight stuff, the planche, the front lever, which are skill moves for those that don't know. And I was like watching these guys that have been doing it for, 15 years and were just like, professional gymnasts are on a superhuman level of strength, ability, coordination. So my expectations were immediately ruined. But yeah, needless to say, I got quite distracted at uni. I still finished my degree, which was not in sports science. I actually did industrial design. And instead of getting a job, I worked briefly as a web designer. And then I was like, I'll just, I started making YouTube videos as I was getting into this. And I think at the time I had maybe like 5,000 subscribers when I left university. And I was like, stuff it. I haven't got anything to lose. I was still like living at home with my parents, like most people from finishing college. I'd give it a go for 6 months. If I can make some sort of like income month to month and figure something out, then I'll keep going. If not, I'll get a normal job and just do that. And yeah, well, it worked out pretty all right in the end. And yeah, I guess we're here now. I don't know how long I've been doing this as a job. Maybe like, I want to say like 5 years, but might be less, might be more. I'm not sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been seeing your channel for I've been probably training calisthenics. I mean, I did gymnastics like as a kid from like maybe 7 to 11. But I've progressed past the point in adulthood. Like I'm better than I was then, if that makes sense. Cause like I was like a child, didn't take it very far. It is, like you said, the expectations piece of calisthenics is one of the most difficult things that new beginners run into. And Kyle and I were discussing kind of before the podcast that neither of us have extremely clear training goals at the moment. And we were wondering, kind of two-part question, what your personal training goals are at the moment, like kind of what skills are on your skill set is like what you're trying to achieve next that you can't quite do. And then how you approach, because I know you're also a coach, not just a content creator, helping people set training goals that are realistic and not so absurdly difficult they'll never get there, but they'll actually make athletic progress and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this one, it's much the same as anything in life, right? Like if you're, you guys are obviously business minded. I mean, talk about business, like, okay, maybe I want to earn 6 figures a year. I want to earn 600,000. Like you have these clear defined goals. And certainly like there's no doubt that people also end up with unrealistic expectations in that realm as well. So it's just human nature at the end of the day, like anything else. I think probably the most important thing, I'll answer the question about just training goals in general, is like you want to do something that excites you at the end of the day. Like there's no, like unless you feel like really genuinely excited about achieving something, then really you're not going to have the motivation to get like the long-term motivation, because ultimately all of these things, all of these skills, they're long-term goals. Like I've been training handstands like 6 years now, I think, maybe longer. And certainly when I got the one-arm handstand, that was a big goal of mine. It was like 3 years of handstand training before I started training one arm, and then probably 2 years of like 10 to 15 hours a week, consistent training of just one arm handstand to get that. And it's like, if I really wasn't enthralled or excited about achieving that goal, like I would have given up way, it's a grind. Certainly, to be honest with you, if I didn't make the content like as a job, certainly that helped me be more accountable, like sharing the fact that I was trying to achieve this movement, like putting it out there. Even like on a more individual level, you could just like tell your friends, be like, I want to do this. Like I want to, having some form of accountability is hugely important. But yeah, certainly like it has to excite you. And then in terms of like being realistic, I would say like it's good to aim for the lofty, like the high end goals. But then you just need to like break down and give yourself some process goals along the way, because, if you're working something for like, maybe it's going to take you 4 or 5 years to achieve something. It's just like, you'll get maybe like 6 months in and you'll be like, this kind of sucks. Like, what's the next thing? So if you give yourself like little things to hit along the way, kind of break down that goal, maybe somebody who wants to work on the planche, for example. So the planche would be like basically, think of a push-up position, but the feet are elevated on the floor. So you're hovering on that 2-arm position. Ridiculous movement. We can break that down. We can do like, okay, a press to handstand. It's a pretty cool movement to do. It's a lot more achievable. Kind of works the same sort of strength. It's something to do on the way towards it. So that's kind of how I would say, it's the same thing for anything in life. Like break it down, find some process goals, find something along the way that's going to keep your motivation there. And yeah, if you're really excited, you're definitely going to be committed to it.
Are there any goals for you right now that are still 5 to 6 years out?
I don't know really. So the one on handstands, as I said, was a big one for me. And I can't like. It's one of those ones that you probably wouldn't understand unless you train handstands, but it's really freaking hard. And it was definitely like it's the there's the Einstein quote, which is like doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. But like that is handstands. You have to do the same thing over and over and over again and just keep grinding it out. So that for me, like once I ticked that off, I was like, cool, I'm happy now. Like I'm content. And I think that it's important to not always be grinding towards a goal and like actually take a little bit of time just to be like, okay, cool. I've achieved some cool stuff. I'm pretty happy with where I am and like just enjoy that moment and play around with it and have some fun. And that was maybe like a year ago. So I kind of had like a chill year. I haven't really had any training goals. I've just been like training for the fun of it. And then unfortunately I had an infraspinatus tear, which is a rotator cuff tear, doing some circus stuff, and that has just about healed up now. So I'm kind of like ready to take on some more goals, which for me is we talked about as the planche, something that's always been quite elusive for me. There's definitely like an aspect of you need to be short and light and potentially Russian to be good at calisthenics. And I'm tall and heavy and definitely not Russian. So again, like that for me is very similar to the one I'm like, it's actually the original goal that I started bodyweight training with, like, I don't know, 7 years ago now. Been up and down, made some progress, lost some progress. Fairly recently, it's been close, but I think probably realistically it'd be another year, maybe 18 months to achieve that. So that's what I'm sort of setting out on now.
Got another journey you're going down the path for, right?
And I tend to just, there's only one goal. Like I tend to just stick to the one goal. I think that's generally something that people kind of making a mistake with fitness stuff. They try to achieve like 5 or 6 or 7 things at once. Business things as well, of course, like just general life stuff. Like it tends to help anyone you see who's been like insanely successful at either training or life stuff. They tend to be like hyper focused on a small fraction of stuff. So
the one thing, right?
The one thing.
So you sort of like had this moment in college where you were sick and then you lost all of your gains for the last 2 years, and then you find bodyweight training and like, I guess, a more holistic approach to just like training in general. And so what were some of your key learnings in that period that like led you down this path that you're on of bodyweight training and helping others to accomplish these same goals?
Yeah, so I should clarify, I was more of like a classic gym bro before I had that like illness episode. So I was like kind of, lots of like kind of energy drinks, pre-workout, lifting like pumpy weights, all of that sort of stuff. Like that's kind of ego lifting. That's kind of what I was doing beforehand. So I had almost like that experience, although it's nothing crazy. It's nothing like, I've definitely heard some way more impressive stories out there, some incredibly inspiring ones. Like it's just pretty standard. But it was a little bit of a realization for me. I was like, I probably need to like take care of myself a little bit better and think about, I don't know, like what makes me feel good, rather than trying to do things because I think it will make other people think that I'm good or look good or whatever. So it was more like a switch from doing things for extrinsic motivation to more intrinsic. And at that time as well, I was reading a fair amount of philosophy stuff, specifically Stoicism, and they talk a lot about the importance of Stoicism is the development of the mind as well as the body and how that works kind of concurrently together. So really, I don't know. I guess I went down a more mindful, philosophical route with my training, and bodyweight training just ended up being the tool to kind of cultivate that.
I wanted actually to get into some of the philosophy underpinning your channel, because I know the warrior, you don't just like say that for the sake of like it's a cool word and like it means you fight or like you're tough. Like is inspired by the Jungian archetype. So could you explain like how that kind of the motivation of what you mean when you say bodyweight warrior? Because it's not just like body weight tough guy, or however you want to construe it.
Yeah, and it often gets misconstrued, right? Which is it's fair enough. Like people just aren't aware. People think like it's about being hardcore and like other things. But like the Warrior is from the book or a book by Robert Moore, which is called The King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and that's to do with these are archetypes of masculine energy. And when I say masculine energy, it's not necessarily something that is in men. Masculine would be like the yang. You also have the yin. Everyone, man and women, have an aspect of yin and yang, masculine and feminine, to varying degrees within their personality. So the warrior aspect of that is I guess it's really it is an aggressive sort of energy. It's an aggressive force, but when we think of aggression, we think of like people getting into fights and people being confrontational and stuff. Whereas actually, aggression can mean more about doing things with rigor and passion, and really, like, if you want to achieve anything in life, obviously training is important, but just anything in general, like, you need to be able to harness that warrior energy. You need to be aggressive with the things that you're doing. You need to work diligently. You need to be able to put in that effort. Warriors are also part of that archetype is about being skillful, about mastering your craft. Again, that can apply to anything. Training is very much about mastering the craft. The bodyweight training is about mastering the craft of your body. It's about doing things for the right reasons as well. Like a warrior is a protective force, right? And that, you should be fighting for your tribe, your civilization, whatever it is. And it's the same thing. Like, you want to be doing things for the right reason. Am I doing this because I'm motivated by looking good and the subsequent validation that I'll get from other people because I look a certain way, or am I doing it because it's something that really fulfills me, or is it something that's going to actually benefit me long term for my health? So that's a lot to do with the warrior energy. It's quite broad, I guess. There's many other aspects to harnessing your being mature masculine. So we have a lot of immature masculinity, which is what would be referred to as toxic masculinity. Like, actually, mature masculinity is a very valuable thing. It's a guiding force for many things in life. So that's kind of what the warrior means. It's a butchered example. So and as you mentioned, so you talked about Jung. So Carl Jung is a mid-century philosopher. I don't know, is he a philosopher? He's probably more of a psychologist. And I mean, some people would say that what he talked about was outdated, but there's a lot of people who still value his work. I certainly do. As with all of these things, like, psychology is a massively complex subject, and Jung had certainly a certain wisdom when it came to it, a certain take on it, and I do appreciate that point of view as well as many other points of view. Like, it's all interesting to explore. But yeah, Jung is fascinating. And this was, and he talks a lot about, he likes to break things down into archetypes, and those archetypes are sort of those expressions of I don't know, personality. Like, there's lots of different types, and then he'd have within that, he'd have shadow forms, which would be like, okay, what does the bad expression of that archetype look like? What's the negative, the toxic masculinity? So immature versus mature, for example.
One other kind of more quippy philosophical aspect of your channel is just kind of the embrace the suck motto. Where did you pick that up, and why why is that one of your go-to kind of phrases in teaching in this domain?
So obviously it's not my original phrase. I think it's actually used quite a lot in the US military, I do believe. And it's basically just about dealing with it and sucking it up and getting on with it. But it kind of just, I think I actually, I said the phrase when I was having a session with, so one of my mentors is Emmett Lewis, massively knowledgeable guy when it comes to flexibility and lots of training practices. And I can't remember what he said, but it was along the lines of that. And I was like, oh, so you mean embrace the suck? Was like, I think we were talking about doing splits at the time. And it's really just about embracing the suffering, accepting that suffering is part of training, part of life, really. You've got to have that contrast of unpleasant and pleasant. Otherwise, you don't have either. So yeah, embracing the suck was just like, yeah, just understand that like most of the time training is kind of like suffering. It's not particularly fun. It's kind of grindy. You spend a lot of time doing fairly boring stuff to achieve those odd goals here and there. They're more like they're small points on the whole training journey. Like if you want to get good at anything, you just got to embrace the suck, grind it out, do the work.
I think for me, one of the most awful exercises is just quad mobility. Like that's just one that it sucks the entire time. Anything where you have like if you're sitting down, kind of a lunge, and you have your back foot and it's bent towards you. Like a lot of people do this on a couch, for example. So like put one knee on a couch and pull their foot towards them, and it just people have never stretched their quads quite well, like that. And so that one, it's like a 10-second duration is absolute misery, and you kind of have to be pretty ready to tolerate some terrible moments to make any progress on that one. That's the first one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, absolutely. The quad's pretty brutal. I mean, quad hip flexor in that regard. The hip flexors, like, it's one of those ones that actually, I mean, it's pretty restricted in a lot of people, partly from sitting a lot and just more that the activities that we do will cause. You know, we don't tend to go through a lot of extension at the hip unless we do a lot of like running or just demand flexibility in that way. And then there's also just like the fascia over the hip flexor, because obviously the hip flexor is a collection of muscles. Like there's actually lots of layers to that, and it tends to either take, sitting in a stretch for a long period of time, or to take a long time, like actually of training, to kind of peel back those layers and see some significant change in hip flexors. And then there's also an element of, I'm pretty sure the nerves or part of the nerves for some of the hip flexors innervate at the same point as the adrenal glands. So there's certainly a link to like stress and that area of the body, which, obviously can play a part as well.
So one question I have for you as someone who I believe makes good fitness content, what is some really bad popular advice right now that everyone should like not be listening to? This could be nutrition, this could be training, it could be both.
So how many haters do I want to make in a video?
You don't have to call people out by name, Just it's the idea, not the person.
I wouldn't. Yeah, no, absolutely. At the moment in my head, I've made a video fairly recently as of recording this podcast, and that was like on the notion of bad form. So I'm like, for me personally, my thought process is like, okay, how can we move barriers of entry to fitness? So that like, how can we make it easier and more accessible for people to train? So part of that is like making follow-alongs. Like I've never used a follow-along on YouTube. It's not particularly my preferred way of training, but I know for a fact that it's one of those ways that people find really easy to get stuck into something. And I completely understand why. Like it's like you just turn it on, follow, do it. And that's why I make follow-alongs. So I know it's like a really accessible form of content. Just do it. That's the important thing. What grinds my gears is when I see people put up barriers to entry for physical fitness. So that would be like, I don't know, maybe you can't do this movement unless you can do this with perfect form, or you can't do it unless you can do it with perfect form, or your exercise should look like this, otherwise you're doing it wrong. And that's just like, it's one of those ones that is more like, it's more for Instagram or more for social media than anything else. Like in reality, how people move is going to vary dramatically from person to person based on their own individual biomechanics, anatomy, and experience in life. Like just look at people. I mean, basically, if you watch anyone walk, people will walk differently. You can actually recognize somebody you've known in the past from their walk. Same with running. It will be, it's very much the same thing, but it does vary quite a lot on an individual level. And so does like any movement, pull-ups, squats, all of that sort of stuff. So I'm more into like, okay, let's just do the thing. Doing the thing is more important than doing the thing perfectly. And yeah, I'm not a massive fan of kind of that side of the fitness content. So I guess that's one. I've obviously do videos on recommending how to do certain form things. So, you could argue that I contribute towards that, but like, I'd always say like, got to take it and apply it on an individual level. Second would be the lack of transparency when it comes to just taking gear. I feel like that's actually been quite a lot on the rise anyway in like popular thought process. Like people like More Plates, More Dates, or Derek on More Plates, More Dates. He's hilarious. But I feel like in general people are getting called out more, or there's just more awareness that people are on gear. Certainly there's some names that don't admit to it or claim natural when it's extremely obvious that it's not the case, and it's just, again, it's just not a good message. It's unrealistic expectation. You know, people set out on a journey that I certainly thought that way when I started. I was like, I actually remember my mum saying to me, she was like, "Oh, you're not going to get too big, are you?" I'm like, no, I'll stop when when I get to a good point, without realizing like actually everyone I've looked up to was taking various levels of hormones or steroids or something, and it's like it's just unrealistic, you know. So again, it all comes down to the individual. Just kind of work with what you got, and I guess you want to become the best version. You want to develop yourself to the best of your ability, not someone else's.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And actually gait tracking, which is like what you're saying about the way that you walk, is the number one way that criminals get identified, is because the way you walk is so distinct. And so like out of a crowd, you can see like what type of person. I did hear that yesterday, and so that might not actually be true, but we're going to pretend like it is for the sake of the podcast.
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised. Like 100%, I've met people who I haven't seen in like years, and I'm like, I can spot them from a walk for sure.
Yeah. And so like that is actually something that I think about a lot, is just the level of anatomical, like, what's the word? Like differentiation between individuals, and how those different preset anatomies are geared toward different like training attributes. And so like how do you recommend that people begin to think about their own body, and how, you know, to best go about like training for them? Like maybe I'm not the best for body weight training. Maybe I should be a sprinter or something like that. Like how do you begin to be self-aware physically like that? I mean, obviously looking in the mirror is good, but like,
So in terms of like, I guess what you should do, it's like, what do you enjoy doing? Mm-hmm. That's the main thing. If you enjoy being good at something, then maybe it's worth trying some stuff out and kind of figuring out what your body lends itself to. You know, you can just look at your physique and then compare it to like Olympic athletes. Like, are you 5'6", like 150 pounds and built like a tank? Like maybe you should try some gymnastics. You'd probably be pretty good. Or are you like 6'4" and 200 pounds? Like maybe you should try some rowing or some basketball. I don't know. Like, you know, if being good matters to you, then yeah, you want to think about it to that level. Right. Otherwise, it's like just do whatever you enjoy doing, and you know, if you're consistent and put the time in, you'll certainly achieve like a reasonable level of proficiency at anything given a little bit of time. You might not be like world class level, but you know, not many people are. So I think enjoying it is the main thing, especially when it comes to a long term aspects. Otherwise, like understanding your own particular anatomy, some things are obvious. So if we're looking at like flexibility, for example, generally speaking, there's a bit of a phenotype of flexibility. So phenotype means like not necessarily genetically predetermined, but a genetic predisposition. And we tend to have strength and flexibility on kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. So like people tend to either be like, they tend to be flexible or find flexibility training easy, but they might struggle to progress strength, and then vice versa. Somebody who finds strength easy to progress might struggle with flexibility training. And that's like kind of a little bit of a genetic aspect to it. If you're lucky, you end up kind of in the middle or like up here, which is like you're good at both. You know, mm-hmm. We have to deal with the cards that we're dealt. But certainly, like if you're somebody who finds themselves who naturally gets strong and struggles with flexibility, you want to get flexible, then you need to train your flexibility training like strength training. So you do, instead of just sitting and stretching your hamstrings, you're probably going to get more benefit from doing Romanian deadlifts or standing good mornings, like 2 weightlifting exercises that stretch your hamstrings. Or, for example, you know, just doing squats, doing split squats, doing overhead press. Like train your flexibility in the way that's going to suit what you're generally predisposed to get better at doing. And if you're more flexible, then generally speaking, it's a hard one to do. It's like you just need to do lots of reps generally. More time, more volume to get stronger. It's just one of those things that's harder. If you're more flexible, generally speaking, you're going to have a little bit less, I don't want to say control over your limbs, but it's the wrong word. I can't think of the word, but generally speaking, like you're going to struggle to build strength in the limbs. So
like power in a direction.
Yeah. Is this a little bit that if you're more tended to flexibility, you're also more tended to instability. So that's obviously going to make you. It's going to make you. It's like trying to drive a car really fast, but with really bad brakes.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I think on the other side of this coin, while we're on this topic, is the nutrition piece, which is another thing that you talk a lot about. So obviously nutrition is, I think, even more so predisposed to different sorts of people, and how I might be best off with a carnivore diet or as a vegan, when Lewis might be the exact opposite way in terms of just the way that we're built and our phenotype, like you're saying. And so how do you approach the food part of this, and just how important is food in the pursuit of some of these physical training goals?
Yeah, I mean that one's massively individual. Just even from the perspective okay, we've got people who are celiac. If they have gluten, they might literally die. Saying bread is okay, definitely not correct in that instance. And there's all sorts of things. So obviously you've got to consider allergies as massive. And then you've got kind of, I guess, diets that venture more into the realm of beliefs and religions, which would be, carnivore would fall into that camp, but so would veganism. So it's a very hard one to say, because I'll put it this way: I'm not on the vegan camp. I've seen enough evidence to suggest that veganism is not optimal, and I certainly think that it would be very hard to argue against animal products as a very good source of nutrition, just for a fact they are. They're a very bioavailable source of nutrition. And then you just got to consider human evolution. We ate animals and we got here. Part of the reason we had big developments in the size of our brain is because we started eating meat, and we started eating near shore shellfish as well. So things like oysters, mussels, all that sort of stuff. So you look at the nutrient composition of oysters or mussels, it's huge. It's amazing. It's like nature's multivitamin. Eggs as well, fantastic for you. So yeah, I think ultimately everyone falls on a spectrum of more plant matter, less plant matter, and if you were gonna kind of put that into broad ideas, I guess you'd have potentially so Paul Chek has he's got his primal pattern dieting, I think is what he calls it, and essentially he's got you've got polar types. So think of this in terms of the region you are in the world. The further north you go, the less plants are going to be available to you. So naturally, it makes more sense to eat more animal products. Try to be vegan in Scotland, for example, or in Canada. Okay, let's remove the modern food system and think about how that would work. It just wouldn't. It's literally impossible. But if you're living on the equator, if you're living, it's going to be way, way easier because you've got access to plants all year round. So just understanding your environment and how that obviously plays a role. Because at the end of the day, with our genetics, 30% is fixed-ish, and then 70%, the rest of it, is based on epigenetics. So genes switch on and off based on our environment. So even if you are perhaps from a polar region, but you're living in nearer the equator, or if you're from Africa, Caribbean, that equatorial sort of region, and you're living somewhere north, actually that's probably going to change those epigenetic factors, which are going to then adjust what you should eat. So really, I think the simplest way to go about it is let's just eat seasonal. Try to eat roughly what you have access to based on where you're living. But then we get into the whole okay, well, actually, how naturally are people living? Most people spend, I think it's less than an hour outside a day. on average. It's just like actually like what sort of stimulus are you giving to your body if you literally spend no time outside? Like we spend the same time in a temperature controlled room, like with the light is artificial, which is a massively different spectrum of light. There's so many different factors here. So for me personally, I think environment's the biggest thing. Like I try as much as possible. I try to see, and Andrew Huberman is a big guy. I know he was recently on the Armchair Expert podcast as well, which is a fun podcast. I love Andrew's work, and also he's very charismatic. He's very good at explaining things, but he talks a lot about the importance of light and its effects on circadian rhythm, which is massively important. Probably one of the biggest drivers, I think, of disease in the Western world at the moment. And basically because like people don't get outside. They don't see, like, if you could do a couple of things to massively change your life, like it would be try to see every day low angle of the sun. So that would be sunrise and sunset, or like pretty close to that time. And I think you'd see like a massive improvement in your health.
Right. There's a lot there. I think that was really valuable. The first thought I had was I just moved to Nashville, Tennessee from Las Vegas, and the native foods in Las Vegas are basically non-existent. So I was just trying to think, because it's just a desert where there's no life, no anything. So I'm like, the native food there would just be death, I guess. Like you just die. So I like the idea of eating seasonally in a place that actually, sustains life in a pre-industrial world. One question
I think ultimately, like, it's probably a more sustainable way of eating is like if you're less reliant on like shipping mangoes from Africa, and you can get some like decent steak from literally like 10 miles away from you. Like, what's the most sustainable way of eating?
Yeah, I've definitely started becoming like, I like getting the majority of my vegetables recently from like fermented sources, because that's kind of like the same. It's not really different anywhere versus like a fresh vegetable that's like sustained by kind of like a more modern preservation means versus like kind of time-tested preservation methods like kimchi or sauerkraut.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I mean, obviously that makes sense. You think about, just look at how kind of anyone in Northern European or obviously North America regions would have existed. It's like, you can't really grow vegetables that well over winter. They would have taken a harvest. We get a big harvest in autumn, the time we're in now. And then how do you preserve it? You have like root cellars. So you have these like dark, damp rooms that you could put like carrots, potatoes, that sort of stuff in, tubers. And then, you have pickles and like jams, another way of preserving stuff.
I think we can add that to the list. I think, you said one of the causes of diseases a lot of people don't recognize is, just improper light exposure, to oversimplify it. And then another one is just eating the same food year round. Like hardly any non-recent example could you eat the same thing 365 days in a row. Or like maybe you could eat sauerkraut 365 days in a row, but like fresh spinach, like you couldn't have that 360 days in a row.
No.
Some people have like green smoothies every single day.
I think nutrition. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense as well. You need some variation, you need some difference, obviously. But nature kind of provides that variation through seasonality. I don't really have the answer for like obviously perfect nutrition. I don't think anyone does realistically. But yeah, I just think like certain basic stuff is like probably the closer we can get to living naturally, the more healthy you're going to feel. And I said, just like, having acai bowls when you live in Scotland in the middle of winter makes zero biological sense. And the light thing is massive as well. Like obviously the data on the impacts of poor circadian rhythm, the links between working night shifts and cancer. There's a massive amount of evidence that suggests circadian rhythm is a huge aspect of our health, and something that I'm only really like tapping into recently. But yeah, certainly, like I think that aspect is almost more important than what you eat.
If you're on audio, Tom's dog just barked. He's been holding him in his lap.
Yeah, she's been sleeping actually. Very well behaved for the last half an hour. But
If you want to see the dog, go to Tom's Instagram. Super cute. Totally worth the 5 seconds it's going to take you to do that. And also definitely shout out Andrew Huberman. I think his first 2 podcasts on his new podcast, the Andrew Huberman podcast, talk a lot about what Tom's talking about in terms of like that low angle light and how it impacts your brain and what kind of receptors it sets off inside of your eyes. All super cool stuff. Really interesting and well produced podcast.
Yeah, I like to leave that explanation to him because he's a guy who actually knows what he's talking about. Like I feel like I understand it in application, but theoretically I'm probably lacking a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, we know well enough to know to send you over to him is what we
yeah, exactly,
have established.
Exactly.
Right. Well, I think that we can transition into what Lewis and I call our bonus round, which is just some more rapid fire sort of off-topic questions. So tell us a little bit about your DIY real estate. What kind of projects have you done? What kind of projects are you doing? And sort of what led to you diving into a seemingly unrelated business to what you have been doing for the last few years.
So it's somewhat multifactorial. So there's the first aspect is it's something that I am passionate about. So I actually originally applied to study architecture at university, and then I decided to switch kind of last minute to industrial design, which is more of like a pure design degree. So it's a little bit more broad. It's more about like design of maybe like products, spaces, experiences. Whereas, architectures, you can only design houses. So it's more like I wasn't necessarily set on becoming an architect. So I wanted to and I didn't really fancy doing a course that lasted 7 years as well. Like 7 years is a long time. Like I'd only just have qualified like a couple of years ago or something. So I ended up doing that. The second part is I enjoy it. It's massively fun. It's very much the same as training or really anything. Like, you have to take time to understand it, and then it's a bit of a grind, and it's like kind of, once you finish a project, it's the same as, achieving any goal that you've set out to achieve. So I enjoy that aspect of it. And third is like, I don't know how long I'm going to be able to be a YouTuber. I'm very aware that I could become irrelevant like in 6 months' time, and I have no intention of trying to like grasp onto that. Like I absolutely love what I do. I'm very grateful to be in the position that I'm in, but as soon as I'm not needed, I will go to the next thing. So I'm sort of trying to learn as much as I can when it comes to that aspect. Something I know I enjoy doing. Housing is something that people are always going to require. So, is a pretty solid option. And yeah, like I guess for the last 2.5 years I've sort of been slowly learning and understanding more. The first sort of project I did was on the first house that I bought. So I just like slowly renovated it, starting with easier stuff, like, obviously like painting, maybe some new flooring, and then eventually progressing to fitting a bathroom, fitting a kitchen basically by myself, minus the plumbing aspect of things. And then I've recently also purchased a flat separate to that, or an apartment, which is purely for a renovation, which is coming to an end. And that was like the first project I've done that I haven't lived in. And that was a massive learning curve as well. And yeah, about to start the third project, which is, so I recently sold my house because, I lived in it, renovated it, sold it, and then moving on and now going to move on to the next one.
So is that the model, is you're going to sell that apartment, that flat, and you're going to continue to just add value and then sell, or are you looking to buy and then hold and rent out?
So at the moment, I'm just buying to sell. And part of that is to do with the difference between like the US and the UK in terms of laws on rental. Mm-hmm. Certainly in the US, I know it's way more advantageous in terms of like taxation for landlords. In the UK, they've done quite a bit to make it less desirable. And ultimately you end up having quite a lot of money tied up, not making like a 6% return is pretty good. Mm-hmm. And you think about like, okay, if I have some stocks, or if I have like, even if I just put some money in a broad index fund, I should get like annualized, like there's 8-10% a year, from doing nothing, and I don't have to own a house or do anything else. So it's like it's just one of those things that renting is more complicated. Whereas if you do the flipping and you're smart about it in terms of like what you buy, how you do it, you can make good money in chunks. Certainly the model that I do, so in the UK, you don't pay capital gains, which is like a tax on investments.
Yeah.
If you on the property that you live in, so you have like your primary residence. So if I live in a property for a year and I renovate it and I sell it and make, I don't know, £30,000, $50,000 or whatever, I don't have to pay tax on that.
That's huge.
So, and I can use that to maybe reinvest in the house. I can buy a bigger house to potentially flip and make more money, or I can use it to pay off my mortgage, etc. So the intention is kind of like to buy somewhere that I want to live in and enjoy, but can make some money on whilst living there, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know you have to run here in a minute, so I think I'll just ask one last question, something that's on my mind right now, and I think Kyle's mind as well, because it's 10 a.m. where we are, and we want our second or third cup of coffee for the morning. But I know you've gone through a lot of variations of how you like your coffee. You were into the MCT oil thing at one point. Maybe it's not too late. Yeah, it's 4 p.m. I don't know if that's late or not for coffee. But how are you currently taking your coffee?
I'm a massive fan of drip coffee, V60. That's probably like my favorite. Simply because it's a bit more like it's like a good glass of wine, really. It's a bit more complex and there's some interesting flavors. And I like my favorite thing in the morning is to like sit down with a cup of coffee and read for like 30 minutes. Something like maybe thought provoking or interesting or something that I'm finding like particularly interesting at the time. And if I'm making like an espresso coffee, like a flat white or something else, usually that would be drunk in like 5 minutes, whereas I can, sit and sip on a filter and really enjoy it for like 30 minutes. So that's the main reason why. V60 or Chemex is my top ones. I haven't done bulletproof coffee in a long time. It did work, like it was useful. I used to do it kind of if I knew I had like a busy day, maybe I wasn't going to get the chance to eat or I didn't want to eat because I could rather just do other stuff. I know I could like do a bulletproof coffee and it would kind of be, I guess, a bit of a hack to kind of feeling full and push maybe not having to eat until 4 or 5 p.m. or something. But I haven't done that for a long time now.
Well, Tom, we've really enjoyed this podcast. I know you got to run somewhere else. Where should we be sending people if they want to follow along and stretch with you or learn from any of the other things that you're putting out?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, YouTube is the best way. It's the free way. Just search my name, Tom Merrick, or Bodyweight Warrior. It will come up. I also post on Instagram, kind of sporadically, and if you want some puppy spam, there will be puppy spam. Until they're a normal dog, then there will be dog spam on Instagram. And then if you want to, if you want some programs or whatever, I have an app which I work alongside and help to design called Tribe. Which I think now is used by quite a few fitness people as well, which is awesome to see. So yeah, those are the main places to do it.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
And that wraps up our conversation with Tom. Always great to talk to people who are so dedicated and so on top of their stuff. My 3 quick takeaways. Number 1 is the base layer is setting goals that when you pursue them, you will enjoy yourself. And so if you're, not wanting to be a football player, but you're like, okay, I want to win the Super Bowl, you're going to have a horrible time trying to pursue that goal because it's not something that you enjoy. And so, set goals that the pursuit of those goals is something that you will enjoy. Number 2 is realizing that things come in phases. Tom opens up pretty, blatantly about how YouTubers don't last forever, and that's just the way that things are, and things go in phases, and he realizes that and is open about it, and will be better in the next phase because of it. And then number 3 is just the level of commitment that it takes to really accomplish anything worthwhile is like gigantic. I mean, I would think one part in this, he talked about how it took him 7 years to accomplish one goal, and that's just like a length of time. That's a third of my life in the pursuit of one thing. And I think that that's, commendable, first of all, and also eye-opening because, you realize just how much it really, really takes to do the things that Tom's doing and the things that really anybody that's doing anything worthwhile is doing.
Great stuff. I have a lot of very similar takeaways, but not quite the same perspective on them that you did. First one, similar to what you said about kind of enjoying the work, is kind of the core activity of the activity you have to enjoy. So we're not, having rose-colored glasses saying that, for Tom, he loves every part of bodyweight training. There's a lot of it, as we discussed, his motto of embracing the suck, that's terrible. But the core activity of the sport is something he deeply enjoys. Otherwise, there's no way you can sustain it for a very long time. Second activity is what you're saying about seasons. Kind of a different way of thinking about that is diversifying even when things are good, right? Because he is saying that, as you said, YouTubers don't last forever, but it's not like his channel's doing poorly right now. It's still growing. It's doing about as good as it's ever done. He's diversifying into, these DIY real estate projects before things are bad. So it's kind of the dig your well before you're thirsty, build your backup plan before you even need it. He's like, I'm comfortable, so it's doing that, before it's too late. And like you said, it makes for an easier transition if and when it ever dissolves. Third takeaway is about the realistic expectations you have to set for a lot of activities. So a lot of the reasons people don't successfully stick with something for a long time is bad expectations. So like for Kyle and I with this podcast, if we expected that we were going to be humongous, tens of thousands of downloads per episode, and all we had to do was like publish 10 episodes, and then we published 10 episodes, realized we don't have nearly those numbers, we would have really been disappointed and probably quit. Whereas we said, let's set 25, decide if this is worth doing, continue to and reassess. So the more realistic your expectations are, the less likely you are to experience disappointment. And a lot of the ways to, appropriately set expectations are to speak with people who have done the thing you want to do so they can give you somewhat of a guide. Again, not perfect, but a lot better than whatever you're going to intuitively think on your own. That's all I have to say for this episode. Grateful to Tom, as I am all of our guests, for joining us for this podcast. Grateful to you for listening to this. If you want to show support, check out another episode in the feed, leave a review on Apple iTunes, subscribe if you're on YouTube. Otherwise, just say hey on Twitter or any other place you think you can find us. It's not very hard if you want to. And let us know what you think of the show and any feedback you may have. Otherwise, we'll be back in roughly 1 week with the next episode. Have a good one. Bye-bye.